The military knows about it, and they are looking to harness its power to win the Cold War. And this is just one of many clues that we are seeing the first steps into a wider Stephen King cinematic universe, borrowing from many of King's works beyond that of just the It novel. Hey, welcome back to ScreenCrush. I'm Colton Ogburn, and these are all of the Easter eggs, references, and little things you might have missed in It Welcome to Derry Episode 2, The Thing in the Dark. So the first episode, it did not disappoint, and Episode 2 is keeping up the pace. We open with a flashback to the end of last week's episode where we see Ronnie and Lily left as the only survivors of this big encounter with It at the movie theater. And for the first time this season, we're getting this series intro, which plays to the song A Smile and a Ribbon by Patience and Prudence, a song that came out in 1956. And you'll notice the album cover for this song is the same art style that the intro is done in. So first we see the Paul Bunyan statue that we saw in the It movies and that is being built in this series, and actually we see it being built in this episode and being protested by some Derry residents. Next, we see this little girl peering into a sewer drain, and on the ground we see an all too familiar missing child poster. We continue to pan out and see the same red bridge that we saw in the It movie, and it of course also bears a resemblance to the red bridge in Beetlejuice. Here we see kids in their tidy whities jumping into the water just like in the It movies as well, and here in this tunnel we can see a kid being lured by this tentacled beast with a lollipop, and in the shadows of the pipe we see two glowing yellow eyes, the glowing eyes of Pennywise. And these eyes represent its true form, the deadlights, as seen here in the It movie. Its yellow eyes are often referred to in the book, and we see them again a little later in the episode in Ronnie's encounter with It. So next we see this poor kid in Juniper Hill Asylum having what looks like a lobotomy, which is an old, discredited type of brain surgery to treat mental illness by severing connections in the brain. It's horseshit and it does more harm than good, so of course it's one of the many torturous tactics that are utilized at Juniper Hill. Now, Juniper Hill is the same asylum that Lily mentions having been sent to, and she is sent to again come the end of this episode. It's also an asylum that was featured not only in It Chapter 2, but various other books by King. Next, we see the well house. You'll remember this place from the It movies. Inside of the house is a literal well that leads down to It's hidden lair in the sewers. Now, this house is built on the location of Derry's former well house, where back when Derry was first formed, the first 91 settlers disappeared without a trace. And this is the place where the entire town sewer system meets, giving It access to all of Derry via the pipes. Now, inside the house, we can see those same glowing yellow eyes peering out of this window, and a family out front having their picture made. And if you look closely, you can see that this kid here senses the presence of It. Around the house, we see this engulfing flame of a nuclear explosion, a nod to the Cold War period that this season is taking place in, and in the flames we can see one of Pennywise's red balloons. A reminder that anytime tragedy strikes in Derry, Pennywise is usually behind it. Now, as we pan out more, we see that this scene is being projected in a classroom with a teacher smiling, reminding us of just how blissfully ignorant the adults of Derry are, and we see the kids doing their duck and cover under their desk as instructed by Bert the Turtle here on this poster. Now, I know we covered this last week, but just in case you forgot, or maybe you watched heavy spoilers for some reason instead of our breakdown, this was a campaign from the Cold War era where kids were taught what to do in the event of a nuclear attack, and the mascot was Bert the Turtle, which also serves as a reference in this series to Maturin the Turtle from the It novel. It's polar opposite, the good to its evil, the giver to its taker. Now, here controlling the projector, we actually see what looks like the glove and white sleeve of Pennywise the dancing clown, its favorite form, and of course, it is controlling a projector, just like when It infiltrated a projector in the previous episode, and in the most crucial scene of the 2017 It film, where It did the same thing. Got a great video about that up on the channel, be sure to check it out. Now, here we see the Bradley Gang Massacre from Derry's history in 1935, one of the many tragedies caused by It. This was a scene from the book that was actually inspired by the real Brady Gang shooting in Bangor, Maine, the town Derry is based on, and later in this episode we actually see a sign for Bangor Chew tobacco. And at the end of the episode, the car full of dead bodies and guns that they find in their dig is none other than the Bradley Gang. Now, this shootout was between the crime family known as the Bradleys and the residents of Derry, who greatly outnumbered the Bradley gang. There were also eyewitness reports from the shootout that mentioned the presence of a clown, and here in the montage we can see Pennywise taking part in the shooting. And we actually saw this same shootout depicted on this mural here in the 2017 film. Okay, so then this intro takes us back another 27 years to the Kitchener Ironworks explosion, which was mentioned here in the It movie. We know that this was an explosion caused by it that killed many children, and we know that there was an Easter egg hunt happening that day, thus this dude in the rabbit suit. Now, the plan for this series, Welcome to Derry, is to adapt the interludes of the original novel and tell those stories from Derry's past, so it's neat that we're getting to see them depicted here in the show's intro. And you know, there's something really eerie about this whole thing that can really make you anxious, and man, when I get anxious, I have this horrible habit of biting my lips. The thing is, I know a lot of you have your own bad oral fixation habits that you're always reaching for without even thinking about it. Maybe it's out of stress, boredom, or just wanting to fit in. Well, that's where Fume comes in. It's not about quitting, it's about replacing. Fume, the sponsor of today's video, offers a simple and enjoyable way to break away from bad habits while still having something satisfying to reach for. Fume is an award-winning flavored air device that has great taste without harmful chemicals. Instead of inhaling vapor, you just breathe in natural, non-toxic flavors that satisfy your bad habit with none of the downsides. But it's especially great because it gives my hands something to do. I love the solid wood design with this magnetic fidget that makes an incredibly satisfying sound. It's great for relieving stress or helping me stay focused. Fume also looks cool, feels light in your hand, and it's portable. But best of all, you can pick your own personal flavors and swap out the flavor cores whenever you want. Personally, I like orange vanilla, but Fume offers tons of different flavors, so there's something for everyone. More than 500,000 people have already made the switch to Fume as part of their habit change journey. And you can be their next success story. For a limited time, if you order the Journey Pack using my code ScreenCrush, you'll get a free Fume topper, an awesome accessory that's great for chewing, fidgeting, and satisfying your cravings. So click the link in the description below, that's tryfume.com/ScreenCrush, or scan the QR code on screen to get yours today. Now, back to what I was saying. So here we see on the side of this building, outside of Ronnie's apartment, an advertisement for jarred pickles that are packed right there in Derry, Maine. And if you're lucky, you might find a hidden piece of Lily's dad in your jar. Zing! Oh God, too much? Too much.
That was a little much.
Yeah, it was, I'm sorry. So next we cut to these two bozos sitting outside of Ronnie's place, surveilling her dad, Hank, on the assumption that he is responsible for the murdering of the kids at the theater. And we get a little nod to the game of Clue. Now, the older cop then says,
maybe he ate him.
Only it wasn't Hank that did the eating. We then cut to Hank and his mom discussing how the police and the people of Derry are trying to pin this tragedy on him, but she knows that it couldn't have been Hank, one, because she knows her son, but also because they were there watching the Andy Griffin Show, which at this time would have been in the midst of airing its second season in 1962. Now, Ronnie's grandmother goes on to say how Ronnie and the kids never should have been at the movie theater in the first place, and she blames Hank for filling Ronnie's head with Hollywood nonsense. She then says that Ronnie must think that she's Nora Charles. Now, Nora Charles is a character from the Thin Man books and the movie of the same name, where that character solved murder mysteries, which is exactly what Ronnie and the kids were attempting to do with their investigation into the Maddie Clements disappearance. We then hear Hank drop Ronnie's full name, Veronica Grogan, and when I heard that name, my spidey sense began to tingle. So I went to my PDF of the novel and I did a search, and not only was there a character named Veronica Grogan mentioned in the novel, but also Matthew Clements from episode 1. These were both characters who were part of its feeding cycle when the Losers Club encountered it as kids. They were part of the same feeding cycle that took little Georgie.
Overly curious George?
Or Georgie.
Now, in the book, we hear mention of Maddie and Veronica both being killed by it, and Beverly Marsh even mentions having been friends with Veronica. Now, this is obviously different for the movie universe, as this show is taking place 27 years prior to the first film and the Losers Club first encounter with it.
With what?
And I should also mention that Teddy from last week's episode is also related to Losers Club member Stan, likely an uncle, and while I caught the similarities that they were both young Jewish boys who were about to have their bar mitzvahs, I did skip over the fact that they do share a last name. Now over at the Hanlon's house, we hear Sam Cooke playing on vinyl, and in this issue of the Derry Times, we see mention of President John F. Kennedy, who is again mentioned here.
If anybody's got a problem with it, they can take it up with JFK.
Now we know that there is rampant racism that is fueled by the hatred of it in Derry, Maine, but we also have to remember that this is the 1960s, and while America had certainly made a lot of progress when it came to how African Americans were treated in this country, there was still a lot of work to be done, and JFK's election was a big win for African Americans. But we should mention that JFK, he did not win the state of Maine, Nixon did. So I like seeing Hanlon having a little fun poke at the fact that despite them living in a state that didn't vote for JFK, Hanlon takes pride in the fact that JFK is the president of the entire country, including Maine, and JFK represents their refusal to be oppressed. It is also later in the episode that we see portraits of JFK in Fuller and Shaw's offices. We also see a picture of JFK here in Ronnie's apartment. Here on the street outside of the Hanlon's home, we see this milk truck pass by, a reminder of the era that this series is taking place in. And remember folks, if your granny ever gives you shit for DoorDashing or Grubhubbing or Uber Eatsing like mine does, remind her that they had fucking milk delivered to their doors.
This feels strangely personal.
Sorry, Grandma.
Now this license plate on the Hanlon's car reads 730929, and the only significance I could find in this number is that if you plug it into an RGB hex grid, you get this blood red color. Next, we see Hanlon trying to connect with his son Will, who will one day father Losers Club member Mike Hanlon, and we know that Mike's parents are brutally killed in a fire caused by it, so it sucks knowing that this poor young guy will eventually die at the hands of Pennywise. But it's also really cool that we're getting to learn that this Hanlon lineage will have had a decades-long war with it, and that Mike is part of the group that ultimately defeats it. Will is then surprised in his new bedroom with a brand new telescope, a telescope that was picked out by his mom because his dad just has no idea what his son is actually interested in, and he too often tries to appeal to his son by doing things that he would have liked to have had out of his own father. Hanlon then suggests using the telescope to spy on the neighbors until it gets dark and they can actually look at Jupiter, but Will turns down the idea, showing that he's different from, say, Phil, who was happy to take a peek at his neighbors. So here we see Hanlon reviewing a file with evidence from the attack on him in his temporary quarters at the military base, an attack that is later revealed to have been a training exercise testing Hanlon's fear, or lack thereof. And here in this scene with his wife in their bedroom as she looks at his scars, we begin to learn that he underwent some truly heinous torture when in combat, and that his time in Korea is part of why he has been chosen for this mission, a mission that we'll discuss in more detail here shortly. Now here on this sign outside of the school, we see that a curfew has been set following what happened at the theater. We then meet back up with Marjorie, who is desperately trying to fit in with the popular girls, and in this scene where one of the girls shares her crush, when she says the boy's name, Marjorie has this genuine, kind reaction and keeps true to her promise that they wouldn't make fun of her, but she then realizes that the other girls are making fun of her, so to fit in, she stoops to cruelty and begins relentlessly mocking the girl.
Sorry, I can't breathe my mouth.
Oh my god!
Now, of course, this is normal behavior amongst this age group, but this is also showing us how Derry and the hate beneath it is infectious and it spreads, causing good people to be cruel, and it shows how the kindness of childhood innocence is stomped out in Derry and results in all of the adults who live there in Derry becoming just numb, bitter, and cruel, as we'll see a little later when Mrs. Hanlon is taking a walk through town. So next we see Will enter class, and the teacher says,
"Are you new to the concept of time, Mr. Hanlon?"
And I love Will's response there about relativity, and I think his interest in space and science could be teasing that we really are going to be diving more into the alien side of not only it and the evils that haunt Derry, but maybe we'll even get a deeper connection between this series and the wider Stephen King multiverse or macroverse, with connections to other entities like Mr. Gray, the alien from Dreamcatcher, who also was a being surveilled by the government, just like they're doing with it, a being surveilled by the government in Derry, by the way, and a parasitic alien that sought to infect the minds of humanity via the water supply. It sounds just like it, if you ask me. And It's human Alias from the book, who we actually got a glimpse at in It Chapter 2. What's his name? Bob Gray, aka Mr. Gray. I rest my case. Thank you. And guys, I am so excited to show you this exclusive It parody merch that we designed for our merch store. We have this map of the Derry sewer system featuring Pennywise as Pac-Man, or you can get your official Losers Club membership shirt. There's also the It IT department, the Overlooked Maze. We also have this Life of a Dancing Clown Taylor Swift parody, this Derry vintage clown costume, and this carpet pattern from The Shining. And if you look close, you'll see that red rum is hidden in the pattern. Links for all of these are in the description below, and now you can become a store member to earn rewards and get free stuff. Shopping our merch store is a great way to support our channel. Thank you so much for your support. Now, back to what I was saying. So anyway, in the classroom, we see that they are learning about the major food groups and the necessary nutrients needed to fuel your body, a nod to the feeding cycle of It that has begun once again. We then see Will is harassed by the local bullies as he enters the classroom as the new kid, just like we see happen with young Ben when he enters as the new kid in the It miniseries and when he is harassed by Bowers. And speaking of Bowers, what's the police chief's name in this series? Bowers. And remember, Henry Bowers' dad, Butch Bowers, was also a Derry cop. And while Clint Bowers wasn't in the books, I think we can safely assume that he is the father of Butch Bowers and the grandfather of Henry Bowers. This series is all about lineage and the recurring cycle of trauma and evil that can be found in our own world, but that is dialed to 11 and personified in the town of Derry by the presence of It. So the same way we're seeing a reoccurring good of the Hanlon lineage, we can see a reoccurring evil of the Bowers. So next we see Hanlon meet with Fuller in his office, and he learns that Masters has been detained for the attack on him in his room from the previous episode, but as we'll learn a little later, Masters is just taking the fall. We then hear Hanlon mention this Soviet-era pistol.
But it looked like a Makarov PM.
This is a pistol that is notoriously difficult to operate, and Hanlon uses that fact in his investigation when he later interrogates Masters, and Masters is unable to use the gun. Now, over with Mrs. Hanlon, we see her walking the streets of downtown Derry to the theme from a 1959 film called A Summer Place. This is a tune you've likely heard used in other films and shows since then, and I love how it delivers this false sense of safety and peace with a simultaneous eeriness like growing under it. It's a perfect song choice for a show about Derry and for a scene where Charlotte is becoming aware that something just isn't quite right in Derry. It may look nice, but there's something evil lurking below, literally. Now, as she's walking the sidewalk, we see this pharmacist. This is the same pharmacist from the book and the movies, Norbert Keene.
You look just like Lois Lane.
Now we can see here that the Capitol Theater is closed down, and we see some other storefronts from the movies like Tony's Barbershop. We also see the alley from the It movie, an alley used several times throughout that film. Here we see the Paul Bunyan statue from the first film is being built and is being protested by some local Derry residents. And in the butcher shop we meet Mr. Kirsch.
Stan Kirsch. Kids call me Stanley Cleaver.
Now, Kirsch is a name used by It. It's one of It's many identities. We saw Mrs. Kirsch here in It Chapter 2, and her fake backstory crafted by It is that she is the daughter of the aforementioned Bob Gray. So there's something fucking weird about this dude's name also being Kirsch, and when he says this line as a butcher...
Been here a lot of years, you see the same faces day in, day out. It's nice to have a little bit of variety.
I think this could totally be It out in broad daylight. This could be It saying how It's glad to have new residents in Derry that look different from his usual meals that he's had over the centuries, and now giving him some variety and foreshadowing how It plans to feast on the Hanlons. And guys, this next line from Charlotte is probably my favorite line in the entire episode.
Why is no one stopping this?
Thank you, Charlotte. This is what audiences have been screaming at the screen for years, not only in shows and movies that take place in Derry, but any film where we see bullies running the streets and chasing another poor kid, and none of the adults seem to do anything about it. None of the teachers, nobody. And it's honestly become a trope at this point. Now, we know it's a big problem in Derry, and we know why, because Derry residents have become numb to it. They're all numb to cruelty and violence, and that's what Pennywise wants. Pennywise wants bullies bullies to cause other kids great fear. Fear that Pennywise can then feed on. And as we've talked about before in prior videos, the residents of Derry and their neglect and blissful ignorance to the existence of the tragedies that just keep reoccurring in Derry, it serves as like this protective bubble for it, so it cannot be recognized by the outside world. So anyway, Charlotte is totally onto something, and I loved how they shot this scene with Charlotte where the people walking around Derry are looking at her like she's the crazy one. And we see that Charlotte is picking up on the nonsensical nature of allowing these bullies to terrorize this kid because she has just moved to Derry and she is yet to become infected. Now, next, over with Ronnie, we see her have a gruesome encounter with it where she finds herself trapped in a womb. And this scene is gnarly, man. There's slime and blood, and it's very traumatic, and that's because it is tapping into Ronnie's guilt for the death of her mother and the traumatic delivery of Ronnie that her mother didn't survive.
You tore me apart, Ronnie. Mommy.
So we know that Ronnie feels guilty about taking those kids with her to the movie theater in the first place, and she feels guilty for their slaughter. And now she is also carrying the guilt for the fact that her father is being blamed for those kids' disappearance. And now we see that it is tapping into that by accessing Ronnie's guilt for not only her father and the kids, but the death of her mother, a guilt that has haunted her entire life. And if you look here, we get another glimpse at its yellow eyes, a connection to the deadlights, which is its most true form, like we mentioned a little earlier. And you'll notice, if you look close, that these are the eyes of Pennywise, the same eyes that we saw throughout the series intro and that are mentioned often in the book. And I really like how this series is holding back from showing us Pennywise just yet, and instead focusing on the fact that the entity of it is far more than a scary clown, and it takes on so many different forms, especially in the book. Oh, it's also here in Ronnie's room that we see posters for A Raisin in the Sun, as well as for Teenagers from Outer Space, a 1959 film about a young alien teaming up with a teenage human girl to protect Earth from a giant lobster invasion. This is once again playing into the theme of aliens and how it is an alien and the military going up against this alien. It's very Dreamcatcher-y, and I've been talking about that since, the first episode with the kids' interest in like Martians and thinking that, UFOs and aliens are involved with the airbase. Turns out Phil was right, that is what they're investigating. They're investigating an extraterrestrial that they are trying to turn into a weapon, and one that theoretically could turn into a giant lobster. Okay, so we cut to this bar and we can see a framed picture of Judy Garland, Chief Browers, and approached by these assholes who are putting pressure on him to arrest Hank for the disappearance of the kids, despite the fact that there's no evidence that he had anything to do with it. And we get a reminder of the rampant racism and hate in Derry when not only they refer to Hank as, well, a word I'm obviously not going to say, but also when they say this.
This ain't America. This is Derry.
Now, this directly parallels the scene from earlier in the episode when Hanlon made the opposite point that despite this being a community that may not be fully on board with integration, it is still a town in a state that is part of America, and the president is JFK, so they can all get over it. Well, these guys who are pressuring Browers seem to have the opposite belief. So Chief Brower is at first hesitant to act as if he can actually do anything about Hank, but then after being threatened with losing his position as chief, we see him also start taking on racist behavior when he has the bartender throw out Hallorann and his friends. Dick says,
"Oh, don't worry, I know somebody that can help us out, as long as you fellas can handle a little moonshine."
And while we don't see in this episode where they went to drink the moonshine, that place was totally the black spot from the book that we will be seeing later in this season. Now, as they approach the airbase, we see this sign that says, "Peace is our profession." Yeah, right. So we get confirmation that the military is using Dick Hallorann, a character who, remember, is from The Shining. They're using his psychic abilities that are also known as the Shine to locate a weapon, that weapon being it. Now, at this dig site, we see a Native American guy looking down at the dig, and he seems very disturbed. Now, this guy is actually the same actor who played this dude in another Stephen King adaptation from this year, The Long Walk, which, if I'm remembering correctly, also took place in like the early 60s. So in the Stephen King macroverse, which is like a version of the multiverse, this could very well be like the same character, just a different version of him. And we have to remember The Long Walk is not actually considered part of the Stephen King connected multiverse, macroverse, whatever, because it falls under the Richard Bachman umbrella that isn't part of Stephen King's like mainline works. Anyway, I don't know that this guy is the same character, probably not. But I do think he is a descendant from the Shokapiwa tribe from It Chapter 2. I also think this Native American woman that we meet a little later in the antique store is part of that tribe as well. And these descendants from early Derry, before Derry was even Derry, they come from a tribe that once trapped it for 4 feeding cycles. That's more than a century, and they did this by using the ritual of Chud.
You see it? Ritual.
The ritual of Chud.
Now, these descendants of that tribe appear to be immune, in a sense, to the spell of it. They're fully aware of the entity and its evil, while other Derry residents remain blissfully ignorant to the evil living beneath them, torturing them and feeding on them, both feeding on their spirits, but their physical bodies as well. Now, back at the school at lunchtime, we see Marge still trying to fit in with the popular girls, and this okay, they're kids, I won't call her a name. She doesn't like that Marge is getting laughs, and she says this.
Weren't you wearing that sweater yesterday?
And that scene had me going full Larry David.
Didn't you wear that sweater yesterday?
What did you say? What the did you just say?
So Ronnie is confronting Lily about making sure that Lily made it clear to the police that her dad, Hank, was not responsible for what happened at the theater that night, and we begin to see that Lily is terrified to tell the police what she actually saw happen that night. She did tell them that it wasn't Hank and that he wasn't there, but she left out the part about a giant monster baby with wings. Why? Well, because she fears being sent back to Juniper Hill. And we see Lily even beginning to doubt what she saw that night because part of her wonders if she really is crazy. Now, out in the hall, we see Rich and Will begin to bond, beginning to form a losers club of their own. Will is reading 101 Scientific Facts by Thomas Inwood, Thomas Inwood being the name of someone who actually works on Welcome to Derry. We also see that Rich has a crush on Marge. We then jump back over to Mrs. Hanlon, who is continuing to explore Derry, and we see her go to Secondhand Rose, the same antique store we'd see here in It Chapter 2, featuring a cameo from Stephen King himself. Back at the school at detention with Ronnie and Will, we see this chalkboard that has a lot of foul language and drawings all over it, but my favorite piece is this little bit that says "fuck Paul." Clearly a brilliant dig at Paul from Heavy Spoilers, which I fully endorse. It makes this show just that much better. Lily is then taken from school by the police, and at the station we see missing children posters, and this one has the name Danielle Van Helden, one of its victims from the book. And here we see a picture of a missing boy, and in the photo he is holding a clown doll. And this scene is just so disgusting, man. The way Brower's manipulating and threatening Lily to make sure she flips on Hank and gives him what he needs to arrest Hank and get the men of Derry off his back. It's all just so gross. And using her fear of being sent back to Juniper Hill, it was so messed up, and it was legit making me angry just watching it. And then, of course, come the end of the episode, she gets taken back to Juniper Hill anyway because of her episode in the grocery store where Pennywise torments her. And guys, this is honestly one of the scariest scenes from this series yet, if you ask me. And no, I'm not talking about it using Lily's dad and turning his bits and pieces from pickle jars into like this octopus creature. I'm referring to the little creepy stares and the smiles that we see happening as she walks through the store. The overhead voice saying things that she's doing as she shops, whispering voices, calling her crazy and saying she should be locked up. This is all just, again, perfectly showing how it is a mind virus. It preys on your greatest fears. Lily's greatest fear being, one, what happened to her father and the guilt she feels for that, but also her fear of being sent back to Juniper Hill. And our editor, Randolf Nombrado, wanted me to mention that prior to her entering the store, we did see this storefront for a Kodak Film Development Center, and we think that this could be a nod to the style of film look that the filmmakers behind Welcome to Derry are going for, trying to emulate that 60s feel in this show. The highlight blooms, halation, and warm rich tones of the show are reminiscent of Kodak Gold 200 film stock, and it's just another cool way of putting us, the audience, in that early 60s period. Now, it was also in the store where Lily saw these cereal boxes with Maddie, Teddy, Phil, and Susie on the covers. And they're all decaying because they're all dead. Well, all of them except Phil. We do not see his picture begin to rot like the others, once again supporting the theory that Phil may have survived the theater attack and that it may have taken Phil back to its lair like it did with Bev in chapter 1. Okay, so now for the really good shit. The military, it knows about it. They know that it is buried deep in Derry. They know that it can elicit fear, and they know how to find and hopefully contain it and use it as a weapon to end the Cold War. Essentially, it is now really serving as a metaphor for the nuclear weapon and the argument that was very prominent at the time following Oppenheimer's creation of the atomic bomb and the dangers behind unleashing such a weapon into the world, even if it is you using the weapon to save yourself. The sheer use of that weapon and the dangers of it then being used on you may be even more dangerous than had you just not used it in the first place to win the war. Now, the military being aware of it is a huge detour from the usual it story from the novel, where the outside world is typically ignorant to the tragedies of Derry and of it because the people of Derry keep pretty quiet about it. But in this show, we are seeing that the military does know about it, and that is very reminiscent of several other of King's works, like Dreamcatcher, where we saw the military investigating an alien in Derry that used water and spores to infect the mine. Now, you guys know my theory, and many others to be fair, is that this alien, Mr. Grey from Dreamcatcher, could very well be the exact same entity as it in this movie universe version of the story. So while they have recruited Hallorann for his shine, they are now recruiting Hanlon for him being Daredevil. I mean, for him being the man without fear. They need someone who can stand up against it the same way that the losers did in their final battle as adults with it, an event that actually hasn't happened yet when this story is taking place. Now, in this secret operations hangar, we see these baseball jerseys that have been found during their mini digs for what Shaw calls beacons surrounding the original crash landing site. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a sec. Now, these baseball jerseys kind of look like the 50s Cleveland, Ohio Indians jerseys, but I unfortunately just cannot make out what the team name actually is on this jersey. Let me know if you can down in the comments below. Now, we know that Stephen King is a huge baseball fan, and he is also a Cleveland Indians fan. Now, speaking of King and these jerseys potentially being Cleveland, Ohio Indians jerseys, we should also talk about how King is notorious for using Native American burial grounds in his writings. The Overlook Hotel, in fact, from The Shining, was built upon a Native American burial ground. And we are getting a parallel of that degradation of digging up ancient Native American burial grounds and digging up native lands when we are seeing the US military dig around Maine looking for it. And of course, we saw this young Native American boy watching on as we discussed earlier. So we know that when it landed on Earth eons ago, it came in the form of a meteor, and we've seen the crash landing site in It Chapter 2. But supposedly there are artifacts or beacons from the meteor fragment that have scattered around Derry upon impact. And once these beacons are found, they could point toward the center of where it resides, the original crash landing spot. Now, before we go to the dig site, we briefly cut back to Juniper Hill where we see it raining and we get this shot of the sewer drain, a reminder of the dread that water represents not only in the It novel, but in many of King's works. Again, we have a cool video on how Stephen King uses water in his stories. It's an oldie but a goodie, so feel free to check that out. Now, at the dig site, Hallorann's shine has proven successful, and they have found an old car filled with dead bodies and guns. This is the Bradley gang, who we talked about earlier in the breakdown. Now, Dick was able to pick up on this because the Bradley gang was killed not necessarily by it, but by hate that was fueled by it. And this has me wondering who buried this car full of bodies in this place. And we have to remember that the Bradleys, they were shot up and killed in downtown Derry. So who buried this car full of bodies out in the middle of nowhere? Was it done by the people of Derry to cover up what happened? Was it done by the Shakapiwa people?
Tune in next week to find out.
Damn right. So, yeah. Those are all the Easter eggs and references we found in this week's episode of Welcome to Derry. Thank you so much for watching. And hey, be sure to come back next week for a breakdown of episode 3. And if you're new here, be sure to subscribe, hit the bell so you get notified every time we upload a new video. For ScreenCrush, I'm Colton Ogburn.